everybody, it's Kendra here, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to sew this very simple dress. This is easily drafted using a dress or shirt that you have in the size you want. So I'm going to take you through the process from drafting the pattern to sewing it all together, and later in the video I'll show you a few different options for customizing the bodice. I hope this video inspires you to get sewing. Alright, let's jump in. So for this project we are going to be drafting our own pattern, and so I would suggest using a top or dress that you have in a size that works. This is about a size 4, and that's what I'm going to be using as my model for making my pattern. I also have this long pattern paper, it's actually just kids craft paper, but I'm going to use it to draw my pattern on, and I'll show you how to do that. I've selected this as my fabric for today. It is woven, meaning it's not stretchy, and the amount you'll need will depend a bit on the size you're making. I picked up 1.5 meters just to be on the safe side, and that's again for making around a size 4 dress. And then I'm going to do it all on the sewing machine this time instead of using the serger. Begin by taking your dress, folding it in half, and placing the fold along the edge of your pattern paper. We will now begin tracing around the bodice part. So we're going to pay attention to the shoulder, and we don't want to draw the sleeve in. We're going to draw where the shoulder seam is. So trace around the neckline on the shoulder, and then just fold your sleeve up to be able to draw the armhole of your bodice. Now continue down a couple inches, and then we'll just draw a straight line across, as you'll see coming up here. So we're not going to do the whole dress in one piece. We're doing a separate bodice and a separate skirt. Now we're going to draw a line straight across just below the neckline, and this is just because we are going to be doing that little gathered short sleeve. So we'll make a separate piece for the sleeve and be attaching it just below what the neckline was on our original. So that's my first piece. Now I measure the distance between the line we drew and the top of the shoulder, and that's going to tell me how long of a piece I need. And remember, that's only half. You need to double it so that it is the same on the front and the back. And for this piece, I am including a little bit of extra because we'll need to seam it together. I'm also going to measure and see just how wide it is. However, because I want it to be gathered, I'm going to at least double it. Here I'm doing 5 inches, even though the shoulder seam was only 2, just to give it a nice full gather. But this you can play around with, do it wider or shorter. There's definitely some room for you to choose. I'm just going to continue with my pattern and fill in those lines. And in this case, I end up having a square, 5 inches by 5 inches. But depending on where you drew your line and how wide you want your sleeves, this could vary. Next up, we're working on the skirt. Now, remember, for this skirt, it's going to be a gathered skirt, meaning it's going to be basically like a big rectangle that will pull in at the waist, not the same shape as the dress in the video here. But to give me an idea, I am measuring the width of the dress, and then I'm going to just carry that up to make a big rectangle, and it'll give me an idea of how wide I want it. Again, depending on your sizes, your numbers may vary. Here, I measured the bottom as 11 inches wide, and keep in mind that your dress is folded in half. And you can either do it in one long piece, so account for the fact it's folded and do front and back, or do in one large piece. These measurements are for just the front, so I'll cut out 2 large squares, 12 inches by 11 inches, and sew them together on the sides to make the full skirt. I've laid out my fabric, and I'm going to begin by cutting the largest pieces first, which is in this case the skirt pieces. You can see I folded over the edge, and I've just checked my measurements, and I'm going to cut it out. 2 of these rectangles, one for the front and one for the back. Next up, I'm going to be cutting out my shoulder straps. Please make sure either when you drew your pattern piece or when you cut it out that you are giving some seam allowance. You can see I'm giving a little extra room here, and I kind of kept in mind if I had kept it before or not, because we will need to hem the sides and sew the ends to the dress. Moving on to the bodice, I am going to cut this on the fold, and just keep in mind what your middle was and trace around it, again remembering seam allowance, especially on that side seam so it doesn't get too tight. And we are actually going to cut 4 of these for the front, the back, and 2 lining pieces. This gives you a little idea of what your dress will be looking like now that we have it all cut out. I'm going to begin by hemming the sides of my shoulder straps. I'm actually going to be using this special foot. Your sewing machine may have come with one, and it just gives you a rolled hem. You can see here, although you can do a regular hem as well. But on each of those shoulder straps, you want to hem both of the long sides. We are now going to sew a straight seam with a long stitch length on each of these raw edges, and we'll be able to then pull the strings. Do not backstitch on this step to give us the gather. You can separate them here and just start pulling until it gets to the width that you would like it. I was aiming for around that 2-inch mark because that was what I had measured on my dress originally. But just keep gathering it in and try to kind of distribute the gather so it is fairly even all the way across. You're going to repeat the same thing on all of these raw edges, continuing the exact same way with the long stitch length, and then we'll attach them to our bodice. I like to arrange them on and then use a few pins just to get them lined up the right way. And once you get both of them attached on one side, I like to do a straight seam across the top of each of them before we sew our lining on, just to kind of as a basting stitch, help keep those gathers exactly where we place them. Otherwise, they can start moving around a little bit. Just going ahead and sewing that seam, removing the pins as I get there. There we have, you can see that the straps are now attached to the front and the back, and I just sewed over where they attached. I'm now going to go on and add on my lining pieces. So lay it flat and put on your lining piece right sides together, and we are going to be sewing them together starting under the arm, sewing up onto the corner, all the way across, making sure to catch those sleeves in there, and through the second underarm, and backstitching at front and at the end as well. And we're going to be repeating this whole process onto the back portion. This encloses those seams and is going to make a really nice in and outside of the bodice. We're now going to sew the side seams together, and you want to make sure that you line up that seam, make it nice and flat, opening up the lining. So I like to put a pin right where those seams match up, and then just make sure that they are laying flat. We're going to sew from one corner to the other and repeat on the second side. It's now sewn together. You can see it's all together. We are going to go ahead and do a top stitch all the way around now. So I like to start again at that side seam to keep it lined up. Also, it's a great time to press it if you want to, or else go ahead and do your top stitch. I like to make sure to get a nice corner on there, and just go slow with your sewing machine and get all the way around. It should be like a big circle, kind of following along that seam that you sewed, and just keeps everything nice and flat and keeps the lining where it needs to be. Moving on to the skirt, I have 2 large rectangles, and I'm just going to sew the sides together. I'm going to go ahead and hem the bottom now. I'm going to be using that same rolled hem foot to do so. However, you can do it however you'd like. Moving on, we will be sewing the gather at the top to attach the skirt to the bodice. And we're going to be doing the same thing as before with a straight stitch. Do not backstitch, and use a long stitch length. I like to go over it twice, go around twice, and then you can pull and be able to get the skirt gathers a little more even. So just keep working after you've sewn it and start to pull, and just keep checking with your bodice to make sure that you are getting it to the right size, and keep an eye on how it's gathering and try to distribute them evenly all the way around. Now that it's gathered, I'm going to go ahead and place the bodice inside the skirt so that we do have our right sides together, and just place some pins around. I like to pin at the side seams and a few all the way around, just to keep the gathers or the ruffly parts kind of really evenly spaced all the way around. And you want to make sure that the 2 lines of stitching are enclosed so that you don't see that, or else you're going to have to pick that out later. Go ahead and sew, and you can either do a straight or a zigzag, however you like, and all the way around. Next up, I'm looking at my bodice. I made this little ruffle by hemming the sides, and I'm trying to place it on to see if there's a way that it could work. I was thinking doing it singly, doing a couple ruffles. I made these polymer clay buttons I was thinking about attaching, seeing if it would work that way. I think in the end, I do like them just placed right on top. And if you're interested in these, I did just make a video on how to make buttons out of polymer clay, so that can be a great way to customize your dress. You're also going to want to go ahead and trim all those strings that are hanging off the edges. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to see more sewing, knitting, and other making videos from me in the future. Until next time, bye!